Have you ever stepped into a family where every glance, every toast, carried the scent of contempt? Have you ever loved someone so deeply that you endured the invisible wounds of his world, only to realize you were never truly part of it? This is the story of Melissa, a woman once dismissed as an outsider in her wealthy in-laws' home, belittled, manipulated, and nearly stripped of herself. But then, she quietly prepared a retaliation no one could have predicted. A plan 3 years in the making, a secret hidden in a wine bottle. And one night, when every mask would fall, if you think this is a love story, stay until the end. It isn't love, it is justice. And it is how one woman claimed herself back. So hold your headphones tight. The story begins. Chapter 1, The Appetizer of Contempt. I still remember vividly the very first dinner with my future husband's family 3 years ago. At the time, I naively thought that all I had to do was behave politely, smile at the right moments, and dress properly enough to be accepted. I chose a navy blue dress from Macy's, the most expensive piece I owned, hoping it would give me a graceful look, elegant enough without seeming showy. But the moment I stepped into the living room, Nicole, my future mother-in-law, let her eyes sweep over me for barely a second, before stopping as if she had just spotted someone out of place in a meticulously rehearsed play. She gave a soft laugh, then said a line that seemed harmless on the surface. Perhaps you'll feel more comfortable sitting with the kids in the other room. Jason, who was still the man I loved madly back then, just gave a strained smile and whispered in my ear that his mother was only protecting family traditions. But the look in his parents' eyes told a different story. It was the gaze of people long accustomed to categorizing others with a single scan from head to toe. During the wine appetizers, his father Brian lifted his glass and asked what I did for a living in a tone as though he were inquiring about some rare disease. When I told him I was a librarian working in literacy programs, he nodded slowly, then gave a mocking smile. How refreshing, finally, someone who believes in serving the community. I was no stranger to subtle sarcasm, but they're surrounded by people chatting about vacation homes in Martha's Vineyard and multi-million-dollar investment ventures. I wanted nothing more than to shrink into myself. I sat wedged between a half-deaf aunt and a teenage cousin glued to her phone, while the rest tossed around jokes coded in a language I couldn't begin to decipher. When Jason tried to pull me into the conversation by saying Melissa works with literacy programs, I felt all the eyes on me. Not with care or respect, but with curiosity, like I was some strange creature transported from a wildlife reserve to this dinner table. Brian dabbed his mouth with a snow-white napkin and said, "Teaching people to read must be very meaningful." The pause before that word, meaningful, was so long and hollow I could hear my own heartbeat stumble. Nicole gave a practiced smile. "It's wonderful that you have a passion for helping your own community." That phrase, "your own," landed like a silent slap. They had never once considered me part of their community. I wanted to tell them about Maria, the 60-year-old grandmother who wept when she finally read her first complete sentence. About James, the construction worker, who learned to read so he could help his daughter with homework. About all the people whose lives had been transformed through the very program I had poured my heart into. But instead I only smiled, nodded, and said, "It's worth doing." Under the table, Jason held my hand, a gesture that should have been comforting, but it felt more like a muted apology, as though he was trying to soothe a wound he had no courage to shield me from. At that moment, I didn't yet realize this wasn't just a dinner. It was the first warning that I was stepping into a battlefield where I didn't know the rules. Every glance, every word in that house was a test, and I was always the one who failed simply because I didn't belong. I tried. I tried to learn how to talk, how to dress, how to stay silent at the right times. But the harder I tried, the clearer it became they didn't want me to adapt to fit in. They wanted me to recognize that I would never be enough. And that was the day I began to remember. Every look, every word, every insult disguised in civility. I didn't know yet what I would do with them, but I knew. One day I would need every single detail. Chapter 2: The Wedding, Banquet, or a Stage Performance. After that first dinner, I began to understand one thing. In the Mitchell household, everything was a performance, and every person had their assigned role carefully scripted. The only problem was, I was never given one. When Jason proposed, I foolishly thought that somehow it would change everything, that the ring on my finger would be proof that I was worthy. But reality was different. The ring wasn't a sign of acceptance. It was an invitation to step onto an even bigger, harsher stage. Nicole, of course, insisted on hosting the engagement party at her house. No one asked for my opinion, and I didn't dare refuse. Deep inside, I still held on to hope that if I were obedient enough, patient enough, they might eventually open their hearts. That party, from the flowers to the tablecloths, was chosen entirely by Nicole. I was merely a spectator at the very event that marked a turning point in my life. When I went into the kitchen to get a glass of water, I overheard Nicole speaking to the decorator. Her voice was soft, yet sharp as a blade. Use ivory instead of white. The bride isn't entirely pure. The decorator gave an awkward laugh, and I stood frozen behind the door. I didn't know what hurt more, the sting of her mockery or the fact that she didn't even bother to hide it when she knew I was there. When our eyes met, she simply smiled as if nothing had happened. Melissa, perfect timing. Ivory suits your skin tone better, trust me. I nodded. I nodded because Jason had invested too much into this relationship. I nodded because I still believed that if I tried hard enough, I could change the way they saw me. That night, I cried until my pillow was soaked. Jason found me the next morning, still in yesterday's clothes, eyes swollen. When I told him what his mother had said, he only sighed, that familiar sigh I had come to hate. She's just protecting family traditions. Give her more time, and she'll see that you make me happy. But time changed nothing. The closer we got to the wedding, the clearer it became. Their contempt wasn't accidental. It was cultivated carefully, like a ritual. Nicole began interfering with the guest list, telling me to invite fewer people so the party would feel cozier. She rescheduled my dress fittings without even asking if I was available. Then acted disappointed when I arrived late, because I couldn't take time off work. Every time I swallowed my anger, forcing a smile, playing the part of a puppet pulled by invisible strings. And then 2 weeks before the wedding, Jason handed me a prenuptial agreement with a half-hearted explanation that his father just wanted to update a few things for legal reasons. The document was thick as a novel, filled with terms I couldn't begin to understand. I should have hired my own lawyer. I should have read every single line. But I was exhausted, worn down after countless attempts to prove myself, too tired of always being the problem they had to fix. And because I loved Jason, because I still believed love could bridge the gap between two worlds, I signed. Signed without realizing that I had just given up every right and that the man sitting across from me with a satisfied smile had planned it all along. That was the first time I saw Brian truly smile. Not the polite, perfunctory smile I had grown used to, but the victorious grin of a man who had just closed a lucrative deal. And I, the fool still clinging to dreams of acceptance, had signed my own sentence. I didn't know then that this was only the opening act. But in that moment, something vital in me slipped away. Perhaps it was trust, perhaps it was myself. Chapter 3: The Color of Wine and the Quiet Scent of Blood. Our wedding was flawless. Nicole had made sure of that. Fresh flowers ordered from an exclusive farm in Vermont. Live music from a string quartet hired by the hour. Tablecloths handwoven with intricate patterns, likely more expensive than my entire wedding dress rental. Every detail polished to perfection. Except me. I didn't belong in that picture. I walked down the aisle in the ivory gown Nicole had chosen, passing rows of guests I barely knew. They smiled at me, but the smiles never reached their eyes. Their gazes skimmed over me from shoes to earrings, as though assessing whether this girl was worthy of becoming a Mitchell. Jason was always gentle, But gentleness wasn't enough when you were caught between love and family. We lived in a penthouse apartment that Brian had bought so Jason would be closer to work. I say lived, but in truth, I merely existed there. Everything from the furniture to the artwork on the walls bore Nicole's signature. I hadn't chosen a single pillow. I lived inside their world, always feeling like a long-term tenant. Time passed. I learned to smile at the right moments, nod at the right rhythm, and stay silent at the right places. Social gatherings with the elite became routine stages where I had to perform the role of the dutiful bride, the well-mannered daughter-in-law. Every mistake misnaming a type of wine mentioning my library work was another subtle cut into my already fragile reputation. But the moment that revealed my true place came during the Mitchells' annual wine banquet. 1 year after the wedding, I had prepared carefully a simple yet elegant black dress, the pearl earrings Nicole had given me for Christmas. Everything was on brand, exactly the style they expected, until the glass of red wine slipped from my hand, spilling straight onto Brian's pale beige jacket. The entire room went silent. The stains spread like blood across white fabric. My heart stopped. I rushed to apologize, offered a napkin, stammered that I would cover the cleaning costs. But Brian only gave a faint smile, lifted another glass, and said as though remarking on the weather, "Next time, don't pour the cheap stuff." Laughter erupted again, this time laced with thrill, as though I had just completed the comedy act they had been waiting for all night. I forced a weak smile, retreating to the corner, my hands still trembling. Among the glitter of diamonds and crimson lips, only one person didn't laugh. Colt the waiter, who looked at me differently, without pity, without mockery, but with understanding. As the party wound down, Colt quietly approached and slipped me a neatly folded napkin. "For your hands," he whispered, "they're shaking." I hadn't realized it until he said so. Later that night, when I unfolded the napkin at home, I found a small piece of paper tucked inside. 4 simple words. "Check the bottle tomorrow." I didn't understand, but I knew one thing: this wasn't a joke. It wasn't an idle comment. I folded the note carefully, tucking it away in my jewelry box, and from that day on I began to wait, silently, patiently, sharply, not for acceptance anymore, but for retribution. Something had changed. Perhaps it was the last fragment of self-respect in me awakening after 3 years of slumber, or perhaps I had just been handed my first weapon. Chapter 4, A Confession in the Wine Bottle. The napkin with those 4 words. "Check the bottle tomorrow" had lain inside my jewelry box for exactly 1 year. I had unfolded it dozens of times, read it again and again, searching for meaning. But nothing ever happened on that tomorrow. No letters came, no secrets revealed themselves, and the wine bottle was buried somewhere among hundreds of others in the Mitchells' cellar, a labyrinth designed for the wealthy. I had almost forgotten it. Almost. Until the invitation for this year's annual wine party arrived. Nicole had attached a handwritten note: "I hope you'll choose a more appropriate dress than last year." I chuckled softly. No anger anymore. No need. Not anymore. Because this year I was ready. I stepped into the Mitchell mansion with a completely different presence. A simple, elegant black dress. The pearl earrings, still Nicole's Christmas gift, but this time I wore them, not to please her, but to remind myself every gift comes with a price. The first person I saw was Colt. He was arranging glasses at the wine table. His eyes caught mine, and for the first time in a year I saw that look again. Not of a servant, but of a keeper of secrets. No smile, no nod. Just a glance, and I knew. Tonight was the night. Dinner began as it always did. Nicole boasted about her charitable soirees. Brian droned on about his latest business ventures. Jason smiled, responding like a machine programmed to play his role. I, for the first time, didn't feel small. I no longer strained to understand conversations about golf courses in Napa or cocktail galas at island resorts. I didn't need to understand. I only needed to observe, and I saw Brian basking in arrogance and alcohol. Jason sneaking glances at me, perhaps sensing something in the air. Nicole lost in her tales of Italian silk scarves, unaware that the storm was already in the room. When dessert was served, my heartbeat quickened, not from fear, but anticipation. Brian Rose lifted his glass and with his usual theatrical flourish declared, "I'd like to raise a toast to my daughter-in-law, the proof that money can't buy class." Laughter erupted like a chorus, relaxed, confident, familiar. But this time it didn't wound me, it only made me pity them. Nicole chimed in, but at least it bought her a seat at our table, didn't it? More laughter, and then Colt stepped forward. In his hand was a bottle of Merlot. 1 year old, that bottle. I nearly stopped breathing as he placed it gently on the table, opening it with a precision as if diffusing a bomb. He looked around the table, then spoke, his voice low but sharp enough to silence the room. "Speaking of wine, someone left a note inside this bottle from last year's party." Every eye turned toward him. Colt carefully pulled a folded slip of paper from the neck of the bottle, treating it like evidence in a trial. I saw Brian's face tighten. Nicole gripped her glass. Jason looked at me. Colt read aloud to the bride, "The one who deserves the truth." I rose to my feet. My voice didn't shake, wasn't angry. It was clear, steady. I'll take that. The note was a handwritten, notarized confession by Travis Whitman, Brian's private attorney, the man who had handled my prenuptial agreement, the man who had lied. The letter detailed how Brian Mitchell had altered the contract after I signed it, stripping away every clause that protected my assets and inserting one that made him heir to Jason's trust fund in the event of divorce or death. I finished reading and looked up. The shock in every pair of eyes at the table burned like spotlights, and I spoke calmly, as though reciting the weather report. "Seems money can't buy loyalty." "Can it?" Father Brian's glass slipped from his hand. Red wine spread across the tablecloth like blood. The room plunged into silence, and I knew this was only the overture. Chapter 5, the final card. I can still remember the feeling. When every eye in the room turned toward me after I finished reading Travis's confession. Brian looked as though someone had slapped him across the face. Nicole's mouth hung open as if she had never witnessed her world crack so violently. Jason, the man I once believed to be my safe haven, was staring at me with an expression I couldn't decipher fear or respect. And me, I simply stood there, silent. But inside, a tsunami had already begun to rise, because I hadn't even begun. Slowly, I opened my handbag, the same leather bag I had carried to every dinner for the past 3 months. No one had ever paid it any attention, just as they had never truly noticed me. Inside was a thick yellow folder, worn, slightly bent at the edges from the countless times I had studied it in my bedroom night after night. I set it down on the table right in the middle of the red wine stain Brian had just spilled. My voice rang out calm, steady, since everyone is in the mood for secrets. Allow me to contribute a little. I pulled out the first page, the divorce papers, filed, signed, stamped by the court the day before. The room was full of people, and yet you could hear the sound of a knife dropping onto a plate. Nicole lunged toward the folder as if hoping her eyes were deceiving her. Jason sat frozen fists, clenched so tightly his knuckles turned white. And I, still standing, spoke lightly. "I think you deserve the truth, once and full." I drew the second page. The original prenuptial agreement, the one before it had been altered, dated, stamped, bearing the official seal of the original law firm. I handed it to Jason. He took it as though holding a live explosive. I pointed to each line, the clauses protecting both parties' assets, the terms outlining fair division in case of divorce, everything that had once existed until his father secretly changed it. Jason's eyes scanned every word, his face draining to ash. Travis marked everything in red ink, every altered line, every erased clause, the entire scheme. Nicole suddenly shot up her voice, shrill. "You're making this up?" No one will believe a lawyer would betray his client. I smiled calmly, sliding out Travis's notarized affidavit with his signature, with witnesses, and if that's still not enough, I revealed the last card, the one I had debated for so long whether to use. The bank statements, fraud, embezzlement, $2.7 million siphoned out of Jason's trust fund. I pushed the stack of papers toward my husband. Jason picked them up, flipping through each page, each business expense perfectly aligned with Brian's trips to Las Vegas and Atlantic City. Each transfer traced to shell companies that existed only on Brian's own falsified ledgers. Jason suddenly shot to his feet. $2.7 million, his voice cracked, disbelief breaking through. You've been robbed by your own father for the past 5 years. I said it plainly without raising my voice. Brian opened his mouth to deny it, but no words came. The man who had once orchestrated every conversation now stood as nothing more than an old fraud drowning in his own mire. Nicole reached for her husband's shoulder, seeking the familiar steadiness, but for the first time, Brian shoved her hand away, as if she were part of the rot he could no longer conceal. Jason turned to me. His eyes were bloodshot, his voice hoarse. Why didn't you tell me sooner? I looked at him, not with anger, not with bitterness, just truth. Because for 3 years you sat and watched them strip me apart piece by piece and did nothing. I needed you to understand what that feels like. Jason bowed his head, silent, and me, I stood tall, head high. I no longer needed anyone to defend me, no longer needed apologies for the past. I gathered each document, folding them back into my bag with the care of closing a chapter. Once I only wanted acceptance, just to be seen as decent, but you, my eyes swept across the table, couldn't give me even that, so don't expect me to show mercy. I put on my coat and walked away. Behind me, no one dared stop me. No one had the strength to rise. That night, I left the Mitchell mansion forever. I carried nothing with me except freedom and the deep, unshakable satisfaction of a woman who had at last claimed justice for herself. Chapter 6, They Call I Don't Answer. I left the Mitchell estate that night, quietly. No one escorted me. No one stopped me. Only the wind through the trees and the echo of my own footsteps. But only a few hours later, my phone began to ring endlessly. Jason called, then texted. Can you call me back? I'm sorry. I truly didn't realize things had gotten this bad. Melissa, please. You need to know I want to make this right. I looked at his words quietly without replying. Not because I was still angry, but because I no longer felt the need. The next morning, I woke up in a small, rented apartment in Midtown. Light slipped through the curtains, glimmering on the glass of water at my bedside. For the first time in so long, I didn't feel the weight pressing down on my chest when I opened my eyes. No whispers behind my back. No poisonous sweet breakfasts with a mother-in-law whose smile was venom. No longer the sensation of being an uninvited guest in my own life. Only me and the priceless calm. That afternoon, I received an email from Jason, subject about my father and about you. I almost didn't open it, but I did. It was short, straightforward. He had reread the contract, checked the accounts, and just as I had said, $2.7 million gone without a trace. Somehow, Brian had created a shell company under Jason's name to funnel money out as reinvestment. Jason had hired an independent financial investigation team. He promised to bring everything to light. He also wrote, I don't expect you to come back. I only want you to know, for the first time in my life, I choose you over my family. I sat there long after reading it. No tears, no smile. Just a small weight lifted. Nicole called too. Relentlessly. When I blocked her number, she began sending emails, then messages on social media. Melissa, you know I never meant to hurt you. You are my daughter-in-law. I've always wanted what's best for you. I laughed bitterly at that. What's best? Was it calling me the poor girl every chance she had, forcing me to consider abortion to protect the family's reputation, criticizing every dish I cooked, Every dress I wore, I didn't reply. I didn't need to. And Brian, he stayed silent. At least, not directly to me, but a few days later, I saw his name in a local financial news headline, Aldridge and Mitchell under investigation for internal financial fraud. Perhaps Jason really had kept his word. I closed the tab, didn't save it, didn't share it, because I didn't need anyone to know I was the one who had set it all in motion. I hadn't sought revenge. I had simply reclaimed my worth, and they had no idea how to function without it. A week later, I received an offer from a major media company where I had once worked before marriage. They knew. They had heard. And they wanted me to lead a new project dedicated to women rebuilding their lives after divorce. It took me 3 seconds to respond, "I'm ready." That night I called Jason back, for the first time since that fateful evening. He answered on the first ring, his voice hoarse. "Melissa just calling to say, I got your email. Thank you." He was silent for a moment. "Then I hope one day we can talk as friends." I replied softly, "Maybe, but today isn't that day." And I hung up. The next morning, I walked into my new office, not as the disregarded wife, not as the outsider daughter-in-law. I walked in as myself, a woman who had stepped out of the shadows, carrying her own light, and that was the true beginning. Chapter 7. When the Losers Beg for Help. One Monday afternoon, while reviewing the proposal for our new program with the creative team at the Startup Hub, I received an email. Sender Jason Mitchell. Subject a proposal for collaboration, if you're willing to listen. I looked at the sender's name. My heart didn't stir. Just curiosity. I opened it. Jason wrote that Brian's company was sinking deeper into the investigation. The board had frozen multiple accounts. Clients were canceling contracts en masse. Investors were pulling out in droves. We need someone to stand before the press. Someone credible enough to calm the storm. And the board has proposed your name. I laughed out loud. The very name they once ridiculed, the one they deemed unworthy of the Mitchell lineage, was now their media savior. The world truly is round, but I no longer move in their orbit. 2 days later, a sharply dressed man came to the center where I worked. He introduced himself as legal counsel for Mitchell & Co. He brought a contract. "We would like to invite Ms. Melissa Mitchell or Melissa Hartley, whichever name you prefer, to serve as communications advisor and image strategist. You would be the public face of the company's reform campaign." I scanned the contract. The terms were generous. A salary double what Jason once earned. No long-term binding clauses. The option to withdraw at any time. And one clause that made me raise an eyebrow: Brian Mitchell is prohibited from attending any meeting, signing, or public appearance in which Ms. Melissa is present. I closed the contract and slid it back toward him. "I'll consider it. But if I accept, I have conditions." A week later, I walked into Mitchell & Co.'s headquarters. For the first time, I didn't lift my chin to feign confidence. I was confidence. I was control. A simple black dress, heels clicking softly against marble floors. No one dared to smirk. In the main boardroom, Jason rose as I entered. His gaze held no pity, no doubt, only respect and caution. Nicole was there as well. She looked at me as though seeing a stranger. Perhaps because she had finally realized I had never stepped into their family. They were the ones who had never stepped into decency. When the meeting began, I spoke plainly. I accept the role of leading the media campaign, but with 3 conditions. First, I would choose my own team. No Mitchell interference. Second, I alone would speak to the media. All company statements must go through me. Third, a 6-figure donation would be directed to literacy programs in District 9, the same community. Jason's father once mocked us people who read but never make money. The room fell into silence. Jason nodded. Nicole bit down on her lip. She knew if they refused, the company would collapse. And for the first time, I saw my former mother-in-law bow her head, not before a daughter-in-law, but before a woman with nothing left to lose and nothing to gain from them. After the meeting, Jason walked me to the elevator. For a long moment, he said nothing. Then, quietly, "You've changed." I met his eyes. No. I just stopped asking permission to be myself. The elevator doors opened and I stepped inside. That evening, I didn't celebrate. I simply went back to my small apartment, switched on the warm golden lamp, and wrote a single line in my journal. Sometimes victory doesn't require overthrowing. Sometimes it's enough to let them see you don't need them anymore. Chapter 8, A Speech in the Storm. I stood backstage at the Sterling Hotel, the warm golden lights casting down on the mirror. The tiny mic clipped to my collar trembled with each breath I drew. Not from fear, but because for the first time in my life, I was about to speak not to be heard, but to be listened to. Outside, nearly 300 people had gathered. Journalists, investors, union representatives, senior executives, and even the very faces that had once smirked at me over expensive glasses of wine. All of them had come to hear the new communications representative of Mitchell & Comerman address the company's financial crisis. Jason stepped beside me, quietly. "You don't have to do this for my family." I turned to him, half smiling. "You still don't understand, do you? This isn't for your family. This is for me, for the people like me." The stage lights shifted. The coordinator signaled. I walked out. Camera flashes cracked like a sudden downpour. I stood at the center of the stage in the middle of a storm of light and began. 3 years ago, I was a woman standing at the margins of a room like this, smiling, nodding, sipping wine without understanding the rules of the game. I thought if I were more polite, if I learned the right words, wore the right clothes, I would be accepted. But then I realized some doors were never built to open. They were built to control, to divide. My gaze swept across the hall. Some shifted uncomfortably. Some held their breath. My former in-laws didn't break me with open blows. They used sharper weapons, silent stares, contempt. And when that wasn't enough, they escalated to the real weapons, legal documents, financial schemes, and lies. I paused, letting the truth soak into the air. But in those dark corners, I discovered something they could never buy with power dignity. Trust and allies. Travis Whitman, once Mitchell's lawyer, chose justice over profit. Colt, a law student moonlighting as a waiter, helped me hide evidence right under the noses of liars. And more importantly, I found myself. I drew a deep breath and concluded, today I don't stand here to save Mitchell & Co. They must face the consequences of their own actions. I stand here for everyone who has ever been told to leave the table because they wore the wrong style, spoke the wrong way, or carried the wrong name. This time we're not knocking to be let in. We are building our own table. The hall was suffocatingly silent for a few heartbeats. Then came the applause. At first slow, scattered, then stronger, louder, fiercer. Jason rose to his feet first, then an older woman in the press row, then the entire hall. I did not cry. My tears had run dry long ago. Instead, I stood, tall eyes locked on the camera, smiling. That night, the video of my speech spread across social media. Thousands of comments poured in. Hashtags like "Build Your Own Table," "Scarlet Vows," "Melissa Mitchell Speech," "Class is Not for Sale" trended nationwide. Days later, I received invitations from 3 nonprofits asking me to join their boards. A renowned women's magazine requested me for their cover feature. But one message moved me more than all the rest, from an unfamiliar email address. Just one line: "I am 63. Learned to write emails last week. Thanks to the literacy program you started 7 years ago. I watched your speech 5 times. Thank you, Miss Melissa." I sat alone in my small apartment. No wine, no music, no extravagant flowers. Just me, the woman who 3 years ago gritted her teeth in silence, now strong enough to make the world stop and listen. Chapter 9, The Last Lunch. A week after the speech, I received an email from Nicole. The subject line read, "We should talk." Woman to woman. I didn't know whether to laugh or feel pity. In 3 years as their daughter-in-law, she had never once regarded me as a woman of equal standing, worthy of a direct conversation. And now, when everything had collapsed, when their reputation lay buried under the ruins of their own making, she wanted to talk as women to women. I replied 11:30 a.m. tomorrow. Magnolia Cafe, window table. Magnolia Cafe was a small, quiet place downtown. No embroidered tablecloths, no French wine service, but it had the best garlic butter toast in the city. I arrived early. Ordered myself a cappuccino and a crisp waffle. Nicole came later, right on time as always. She wore an elegant cream suit, but her face was paler than I'd ever seen it. When she sat down, I didn't rise. Not out of rudeness, but because I no longer needed to perform anything. She spoke first, her voice, carrying the same gentle lilt she used at dinner parties, Melissa. There are things you don't understand about tradition, about duty to family. I cut her off. I understand perfectly. I just don't accept it. She smiled, but it trembled. We all do what we think is best for the family, for Jason. No, I said softly as a breath. You did what was best for your reputation, and Jason was just an asset to be safeguarded. She started to respond, then fell silent. The air between us thickened, sticky like syrup on the verge of burning. Finally, she exhaled deeply. I'm sorry for making you feel unwelcome. I looked her straight in the eyes. You didn't make me feel that way. You engineered it. With every glance, every sugar-coated word, every calculated move. You succeeded. I truly believed I was beneath you. For the first time, Nicole didn't refute, didn't correct, didn't defend. She only bowed her head. Her shoulders quivered. I saw a crack in her iron facade, but not every crack needs mending. I stood, placed a few bills on the table. You don't need to apologize for Jason. He's grown enough to answer for his own silence. As for you, I paused. Apologize not to me, but to yourself, for misjudging the one woman who truly wanted to be part of your family. I turned and walked toward the cafe door, but stopped. Looking back, I finished. The first time I came to your house, I wore the cheapest navy dress I owned. Today I walk away in a coat I bought with my own money after exposing an entire family of lies. Not because I sought revenge, but because I chose not to be silent anymore. I left the cafe feeling weightless, not because of victory, not because of their downfall, but because I had finally stepped out of the game they once tried to trap me in. That afternoon, I sat in my small apartment barefoot on the sofa, my old notebook resting on my lap. I began writing the first lines for my new project, a nonprofit supporting women escaping toxic relationships of power, finance, and emotion. Not revenge, but rebirth. Melissa walked out of that perfect house without jewels, without applause, carrying only the truth and her freedom. Some battles require no swords, only patience, and the sharp mind of a woman who was once underestimated. If you've watched until now, thank you for staying with Scarlet Vows. Don't forget to leave a comment which moment made you feel Melissa truly turned the game around. And if you love stories like this, of revenge, justice, and inner strength, hit subscribe so you won't miss the next ending. Scarlet Vows, vows, where silent vows become the strongest declarations.